All expected council members, if I could ask the clerk to do a roll call, please.
Sure. Councilmember Sack,
Here.
Councilmember Hudis, Councilmember Badami,
Here.
Vice Mayor Risto,
Here.
Mayor Chair Rennie.
Here. So noted that Councilmember Hudis is absent. All other council members are present. Could you roll our meeting decorum video, please?
The public is welcome to participate at town council meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meetings is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. At each meeting, the following expectations of civil conduct shall apply. 1. For the benefit of the entire community, the town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the council agenda. 2. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at council meetings. 3. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at town council meetings. 4. All public comments at the town council meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. 5. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the mayor may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the council exiting the chamber. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the council would return to the chamber and the mayor would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a council meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code Section 403. These expectations of conduct also apply to meetings of all town boards, committees, and commissions.
Thank you. And I think I failed to mention that this is the Town of Los Gatos Town Pension and OPEB Trust Oversight Committee meeting. And we will have our regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. So first, for this meeting on our agenda is a consent calendar consisting of 4 items. Would anybody wish to pull, any council member wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing no hands, would any member of the public wish to comment on any items on consent? Seeing no hands, I will close public comment and come back to council for questions or a motion. Councilmember Badami.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve consent items 1 through 4.
Thank you. And Vice Mayor Risto.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, is there any further discussion on these items or comments? Seeing none, I will call that question. Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayak.
Aye.
Councilmember Badami.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye. So with the 4 council members present, passes unanimously. So that's a 4-0-1 vote. And we will move on to verbal communications. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Would any member of the public wish to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda? Seeing no hands raised virtually, I will close our open verbal communication and move to our other business, item number 5, which is to receive the Town of Los Gatos Retiree Healthcare Plan June 30th, 2021 actuarial evaluation, and turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor and Oversight Committee. We do have Mary Beth Redding with us this evening from Bartell and Associates LLC. She is going to go ahead and give a presentation of the valuation for the OPEB Healthcare Trust as of June 30th, 2021. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Okay, thank you, Arn. And thank you all for inviting me to be here at your meeting today. I am, oh, Arn, you're driving. Okay. Great. I don't have to do two things at once. Let's just jump right into it and go to slide 2. Okay, I wanted to start with just a brief sort of reminder of the retiree healthcare benefits that the town provides to its retired employees. These people eligible for the benefits are anyone who retires directly from service for the town under CalPERS. And for people hired before 2018, I kind of characterize the benefit provided as pretty much the whole cost of retiree healthcare for retired employees. There are some limits, but it's more or less the whole premium for the employee, their spouse, and any dependents they have at that point. Many retirees don't have dependents anymore. For those hired on or after 2018, the town is only paying an amount called the PEMCA minimum. It's the minimum required under CalPERS contracts, and it's about $150 a month. So the benefits these newer employees will get when they retire for their healthcare will be much lower. Next slide, please. Okay, the town has had a funding policy of building up assets in a trust fund to be able to pay these benefits. The town's policy is generally to contribute at least the actuarially determined contribution. That's the contribution that the actuary recommends be paid every year. The funds are invested with CalPERS in their CERBT investment trust using strategy 1. CERBT provides 3 different strategies. One is a little more conservative, one is a little more middle of the road, one is a little more aggressive, and the town is using the more aggressive strategy. I don't want to characterize it as an aggressive investment. It's just more so than the others. And originally, the town started funding in 2008 and 2009 and paying off the unfunded liability over 30 years. There are now 16 years left to work on paying off the unfunded liability. And one of the recommendations we're making in this valuation is that really over the next 2 years, we think with the town about whether or not we should continue that pattern, or whether new amounts of unfunded liability that arise in the future should be funded over a separate, probably 10 or 15-year period. And the reason we're recommending that the town consider that is because if you get to a very short unfunded liability period and you have a big change, it might require a very large contribution in a year. So that would just be for future unfunded liability, and it's really more of something to think about in the next valuation. Okay, next slide. Looking at the number of participants the town has in retiree healthcare coverage, there's currently being a year ago now, 150 active employees. About 3/4 of them are covered by healthcare benefits while they're working. And of your retirees, there's 184. And again, about 3/4 of them are choosing to be covered by the town's healthcare plan. We're not quite sure why not everybody is, but they're not. And just as a little footnote there, of the 150 employees, 37 of them already have been hired after late 2018 and will eventually, if they stick around, be eligible for the lower benefits. Okay. This is a graphical picture of the history of the number of people covered. The green bars at the bottom are the number of retirees we had in every valuation. So you can see that over the time since 2007, we've really added a lot more retirees to the plan. The size of the blue bars is the number of active employees covered. That's shrunk a little bit, but it stayed a lot more stable than the number of retirees. So what we see is that over time, we've gotten to a point where there are more retirees than active employees, and we think that trend is going to continue for the next several years. It's just part of the normal workings of the plan. It does sort of have a side effect of more volatility, but it's not anything dangerous. It's not bad. It's just something we plan for. Okay. So this slide has the results of the valuation. One of the things that's changed for our 2021 valuation is that we're recommending a lower discount rate. And the discount rate we use is the rate at which we calculate the present value. So when the discount rate is lower, the liabilities go up. You can think of it as needing to invest more money now. So it'll grow if it earns a lower rate. So it'll grow to be enough to pay out the benefits. So we've dropped our recommended discount rate from 6.75% to 6.25%, due partly to sort of an investment community in the past few years. There's much more of a stronger feeling that returns on assets are going to be lower going forward than in the past. And we also have a lower long-term inflation assumption in there. I know that short-term inflation is being problematic, but we really think that in the very long run, 30, 40, 50 years, it's going to be a little bit lower. The Fed's really committed to keeping that low. Okay, so with that as a background, can I highlight the number I want to start talking about is the actuarial accrued liability. It's about in the middle of that column, and it went from $27 million last year, 2 years ago, to $28.7 million this year, which is actually, we'll see on the next slide, less than the expected growth. So that's the value that this town owes for OPEB benefits accrued to date for the active employees and for the retirees. So you're still $29 million. The value of assets has grown quite a bit between 2019 and 2021. And we use a smoothing technique. We don't actually use the market value of assets. The reason we use a smoothing technique is because the long-term liabilities are a very smooth number. And as we know, the past few years, the value of assets has been really volatile. So on our smooth basis, trying to get rid of some of the volatility, we had $23 million of assets for a $5 million unfunded. That's down $3 million from 2 years ago. And the funded percentage has gone from 68% to 81%. The footnote on the bottom talks about what would have happened if we had not used smoothing and we had used market value of assets. The plan would have been in 2021, there were actually $26 million market value of assets, and the plan would have been 91% funded. But I think given what's happened in 2022, the actual smooth values in 2022 will be a lot more consistent with the smooth values in 2021. Hey, here's a picture that I really love looking at this picture because it shows what happens when the town has been working very hard at funding the OPEB benefits. If you go back to 1/1/2008, there were no assets set aside. The plan was 0% funded. And here we are in 2021. And looking at the dotted lines, the smoothed asset value, the plan has already gotten to 81% funded, which is just really excellent and shows the commitment and the hard work that's been put in here. So why did numbers change between our last valuation and this valuation? We would have expected the unfunded liability to be $8.2 million on June 30th of 2021. It was actually $5.5 million. Why was it lower? I think a little bit surprising maybe to most people is that healthcare premiums in that time were much less than we had expected. Particularly for people eligible for Medicare, they were very flat over the time period instead of going up. We saw there's just a little bit of the COVID time period in here. And in the very beginning of COVID, the actual effect was that people were delaying healthcare and premiums were not rising. So we did see a $3 million cost reduction due to that. The assumption to change the discount rate added about $800,000. We had more people retiring than expected in that 2-year period, retiring early. That added some liability, some other net assumption changes that were pretty much a wash. And then the investment gain, as we reflected on the smooth basis, was about $1.3 million, also a cost reduction. So that's how you get between them. The next slide talks about the recommended contribution for the next 2 years. So if you look towards the right under the 6/30/21 valuation heading, the contribution we're recommending for the fiscal year, this column headings are wrong. The first one there should be 22-23 with the $1,372,000 contribution on it. And then next year, $1,427,000. So those are lower than the previous recommended contributions, primarily because we did have the good asset return and we have lower premiums than expected. They're down to about 8% of payroll for those 2 years. And then this is a new slide you haven't seen before, mainly because Tier 2 is new. We first, we really have our first group of Tier 2 people. So I wanted to just demonstrate how much cost savings there are in that lower benefit the Tier 2 folks will have. Right now, about almost a quarter of your people by headcount are Tier 2, 37 out of 150, but much lower than that by payroll. These are your newest hires, and so generally entry-level people. If you look sort of in the middle of the box, it tells us that the Tier 1 folks, OPEB benefits cost about 6.5% of pay versus about 2.3% of pay for the Tier 2 people, where in dollars, it's over $8,000 a person per year for a Tier 1 person to pay for their OPEB benefits. And it's only about $1,800 a year for a Tier 2 person. So there really is a substantial future cost savings coming as you hire more and more OPEB Tier 2 people. Okay. And then the last slide is a projection. This projection takes into account the town's plan to really not put anything into the trust this year, fiscal 23, but going forward to pay the recommended contribution and reimburse itself for benefit payments over that amount. And what that will lead to, so the total contribution shows that that's actually declining just a little bit as we go forward and the unfunded liability gets paid off. And then in the far right column, it's really just sort of a demonstration that, yes, if everything goes as expected, which we know it's not very likely to, but if it did, this is a good plan because it does lead to the OPEB benefits being fully funded in 2032. That is the last slide I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Let me start off with the first question. So not yet in these numbers are the return, ending June of 2022, right?
Right.
We know we had a really good market. I know the CalPERS return was 21% for their pension. So I assume that we got something like that out of this. They then, in the year ending June 2022, are expecting to lose 6.1% instead of a gain. So I would expect our fund to be very similar with a loss, something in that range. So that whole picture you just showed us is going to change next year because our unfunded is going to grow because of the loss of that we will most likely be similar to the CalPERS loss.
What happens with the asset smoothing, it actually has been working really well when we're looking at preliminary numbers. Your fund actually earned, I think well over 21%. I think more like 28, if I remember right, for fiscal 21. We only took into account 20% of that gain, 1/5 of it, and we ignored the other 4/5. And when we combine that with doing the same thing for only taking into account 1/5 of the 2022 loss, it ends up being very stable. And so the results really don't change very much. I
So
think
the chart you just showed us won't change that much because of the 5-year smoothing that you're using.
right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, on the consent calendar, you actually saw the assets for the CERBT and the market value of assets as of June 30th, 2022 is roughly around 22.8 million, which is almost exactly what they're using for the actuarial value of assets. So it should balance each other out. And Mary Beth, if I'm hearing you correctly, will stay somewhere right around the high 70s, low 80 funding status.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? I don't see any. So this is a receive item. So we don't need a motion. So we can,
Mayor,
yeah, go ahead.
the back end of this does say adopt the assumptions that Bartel is recommending.
You're
You folks
right.
for the 115 plan are the actuaries, the fiduciaries, and so you should adopt the recommendations. Mary Beth, it's reducing from 6 3/4 to 6 1/4. And were there any other recommendations currently?
The inflation assumption dropped from 2 3/4 to 2.5, and I think we also changed assumptions to pick up CalPERS demographic assumptions. But really, the big one was the discount rate.
So if Mayor in a motion, it could be the reduction of the discount rate because that also includes the inflation adjustment. So that the discount rate from 6 3/4 to 6 1/4, that'd be great.
Okay, Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. Yeah, I can make that motion to adopt the assumptions prepared and recommended by Bartel Associates for the Los Gatos Retiree Healthcare Plan, June 30th, 2021 actuarial valuation. And that would be changing the discount rate from 6 3/4 to 6 1/4%.
Do I have a second for that motion? Councilmember Sayak?
I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Did I open this to the public?
No,
I did not. Would any members of the public wish to comment on this item before I call the motion? I don't see any hands come up, so I'll close public comment and call the question. Councilmember Sayak,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Risto,
Aye.
Councilmember Badami,
Aye.
and the mayor votes aye. So that's a 401 vote with Councilmember Hudes absent. And so then we can move on to item number 6, I believe it is.
Correct. Thank you, Mayor and Oversight Committee. So this is a receive item, similar to the OPEB valuation that you just received. The town has received their actual valuation from CalPERS for our miscellaneous plan, our safety plan, and then our PEPRA safety plan. Every year, Bartel and Associates will do a deeper dive on the valuations. That will be coming probably at the next meeting 3 months from now. But because the valuations were public, we wanted to make sure we got them in front of your Oversight Committee. Similar to what was discussed with OPEB, and that's already been stated, the market returns of 21.6% have had a significant impact on the previous funding status. You can see that for the town's miscellaneous plan, that return has resulted in an 87.3% funding status compared to 71.8% in the 2020 valuation. You can see for the safety plan, it's resulted in about an 80% funding status compared to 70.4% for 2020. And you can see for the town's PEPRA plan, it actually shows a funded status of 105.3% versus the 90.6%. Similar to the OPEB plan, we are starting to see that, as we bring on new hires and they move into the PEPRA plan, we are starting to see that it is becoming a greater percentage of the plan population for the current employees. And so over time, similar to the OPEB plan, this will actually benefit the town because most employees will end up in the tier structure that's more cost effective for the town. I am fairly well versed with actuarials, but I'm not an actuary, but I'm open to questions if folks have any. But I will say that another item that you had tonight on your consent calendar was showing that the CalPERS PERF plan did lose 6.1% as of June 30th, 2022. And it was highlighted at the Finance Commission that not only do you have to think of it in terms of the 6.1 loss, but they expected a 6.8 gain. And so that actually equates into about a 12.9% loss. So similar to OPEB, CalPERS does use a smoothing, but I just want to caution folks, while this is really positive news, pension funding is a long-term strategy and it'll continue to move up and down, but clearly this was a positive development.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. So I guess the only question I have is, it sounds like because of the volatility, it's not a problem that we're overfunded on the PEPRA, that will correct itself, or are there any recommendations to change anything for that?
No, and unlike OPEB, where you folks are the fiduciaries and you actually determine things like the discount rate, CalPERS is the administrator of this plan, and they're the administrator of everything, including what they decide the asset allocation should be and what the expected rate of return should be. One of the other outcomes of having a 21.6% return is it kicked in what CalPERS refers to as their risk mitigation plan for the first time, where they want to harvest excess returns and use that to pay down the discount rate. And so that return actually had CalPERS move the discount rate from 7% to 6.8. But you don't necessarily see that as a cost to the town, which normally it would be, because they use those excess returns to pay it down. And so you still see a very improved funding status. And you also see that they de-risk the plan a little by moving from 7% to 6.8.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But the PEPRA plan, it's in its infancy, but it's doing what it was intended to do, which is to start off with little or no unfunded liability, with the expectation that it won't be as volatile or have as many changes to the benefit structure that all the legacy plans have had.
Okay. No questions I see. I have seen many of the most of the council members listening in on the Finance Commission. So even though they're not asking questions now, it's because they've been studying hard and listening in on the Finance Commission.
Do we have to open public comment on this?
Yeah. Would any member of the public wish to comment on this item? Don't see any hands, so I'll close public comment. So this one we don't actually need a motion for, it looks like. It looks like there's no questions. Any comments from anybody? So this is our last agenda item. I'll close this agenda item and adjourn our meeting. We will go to our regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. We'll see you all then.
Thank you.